The vast, arid lands of Arizona hold more than just dust and suffocating heat. Hidden among rugged mountains and desolate desert expanses, highly restricted military bases operate under absolute secrecy, far from the prying eyes of the public. Officially, these locations serve as training facilities, weapons testing grounds, and intelligence operations hubs. But leaked documents, testimonies from former military personnel, and strange, unexplained events suggest something far more sinister is happening. Rumors persist that beneath the sands of Arizona, there are massive underground facilities where top-secret projects are carried out with no public oversight. Some of these bases have been linked to experiments involving mind control, genetic engineering, and even technologies that defy human comprehension. Many who have worked within these installations claim to have witnessed things beyond logic. Non-human entities, machines that seem to think for themselves, and soldiers who return different, as if they've lost a part of their humanity. Official records never mention such details, and anyone attempting to investigate too deeply hits a wall of silence. Yet, truckers driving through isolated desert roads and locals living near these bases frequently report bizarre phenomena, metallic noises echoing at night, bright lights appearing out of nowhere, and humanoid shadows moving where no one should be. What is really happening inside these bases? Are these merely conspiracy theories fueled by fear and the unknown? Or is the government hiding something too dangerous to be revealed to the world? One thing is certain: there is something in the desert that should not be there. If someone had told me this story before, I would have laughed. I've always been a logical guy. My name is McAllister, U.S. Army. 6 years of service. I've seen a lot, but I've never been the type to believe in things I can't see or touch. Ghosts, native legends? Bullshit. When I got transferred to Fort Huachuca, I thought it would be just another base. Arizona was hot, dry, isolated, but nothing I couldn't handle. What I didn't know was that this place had a reputation, and soon I'd find out why. From day one, the guys were talking about strange things happening there. Skinwalkers, they called them. Creatures that can change shape, walk like men, or move like animals. They hide in the desert, and worse, they can mimic your voice. You hear someone calling your name at night and you're alone. Don't answer. That's what Corporal Rodriguez told me on my first day. He was a veteran there, had been stationed in Huachuca for years. One of those guys who, you just know, has seen real shit. I laughed. Straight up laughed in his face. I thought it was just another veteran trying to scare the new guy. Sure, Sergeant Rodriguez, I'll watch out for the boogeyman. I was joking. He wasn't. He just looked at me and said, "It's not a joke." The silence of the desert life on the base was normal. Same routine, same training. But there was something different about this place. You ever get that feeling like you're being watched? I felt it all the time, especially at night. I'm not paranoid, never have been. But in Huachuca, the desert felt wrong. Then came my first night patrol. That's when I noticed it. The silence. Absolute silence. If you've ever been in the desert, you know, it's never truly quiet. There's always something. The wind, the rustle of small animals, the distant call of coyotes, the buzz of insects. But that night, nothing. It was like the world had stopped. No crickets, no coyotes, not even the wind. And in that suffocating silence, I felt something watching me. At the time, I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks. I finished my patrol, convincing myself I was just letting the guy's stories get in my head. But I should have taken it more seriously. On my fourth night at Fort Huachuca, I was assigned a solo patrol along the base perimeter. Nothing unusual, just a routine sweep to check the area and report back. I was already used to the darkness and silence of the desert. But that night was different. A world without sound. Something was off from the start. Even in an isolated place like this, you'd always hear something. The wind scraping across the dry earth, the distant chirp of a cricket, or the occasional howl of a coyote. But that night, nothing. It was like someone had turned off the sound of the world. I kept walking, trying to convince myself it was just paranoia. I had my flashlight, my rifle, my radio. If something was out here, I was ready. But still, my gut felt tight, like my body knew something I didn't. The thing in the trees then, I saw it, about 30 meters ahead, standing among the twisted, dead trees. A figure. At first, I thought it was just another soldier, maybe a patrolman I hadn't seen earlier. But something was wrong. Very wrong. The way it stood, something about its posture was just off. The silhouette was too long, too thin, like its bones had been stretched unnaturally. Then, my eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I saw the worst part. Its legs. They weren't right. The knees bent backward, like the legs of an animal. My heart slammed against my ribs, my whole body locked up. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, but I couldn't move. The air around me felt thick, heavy, like something invisible was pressing me down. I had never felt a fear like that before. My hand shook as I slowly lifted my flashlight and pointed it at the thing. Then, it moved, not like a man, not like an animal, but like something that shouldn't exist. The movement was jerky, wrong. Like it was jumping sideways and backward at the same time. My brain couldn't process it. Its eyes flashed, a bright, unnatural yellow, like the eyes of a predator in the dark. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. My breathing turned shallow and fast. Every part of me was screaming, "Run." Then it vanished into the brush. The voice on the radio, I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I just reacted. I grabbed my radio, gripping it so hard my knuckles turned white. I tried to steady my voice. "This is Private McAllister. There's something in the northern sector. I need backup now." The radio hissed with static. A few seconds of dead silence, then a voice, "McAllister, come here." I stopped breathing because the voice that came through the radio was mine. My blood turned to ice. My legs felt cemented to the ground. I knew it was impossible. I hadn't said that. I hadn't called myself, but the radio was saying my name with my own voice. I didn't stay to find out what it was. I pressed my rifle to my chest and ran as fast as I could back to the base, knowing that something was behind me. But I never looked back. I wouldn't dare look back. And to this day, I still wonder what would have happened if I had answered. I dropped the radio. I didn't think. I just threw it to the ground and ran. My boots kicked up dry dirt as I sprinted through the desert, lungs burning, adrenaline flooding my veins. My heartbeat was so loud it felt like my chest was going to explode. But I didn't look back. I couldn't look back. Then, I heard it, footsteps, but not normal ones. The sound was strange, erratic, like something was running on 2 legs, then 4, like it was trying to move like a man. But its body wasn't built for it. Like its bones were breaking and resetting with every step. The thing was hunting me. The desert around me felt alive. The shadows of dead trees twisted at the edge of my vision. I felt eyes on me. Not just from the thing chasing me. Others. Many others. Watching from the dark, the air was thick, heavy, like I was running underwater. Every instinct in my body screamed, "Something is wrong." Wrong in a way logic can't explain. My breathing was shaky, uneven. My legs ached. My body begged me to stop, to turn around. But deep inside me, something primal whispered, "If you look, you're fucked." I didn't know what that meant, but I didn't look. I could see the base ahead, the dim lights of the perimeter poles. They were weak, but they were my only chance. My lungs were on fire, my legs felt like lead, but I kept running. The footsteps behind me got faster, more desperate, and then they stopped. Silence. A terrifying, absolute silence, because things like that don't just stop. It was watching me, but I kept running. 50 meters to the base. 30, 20. My body wanted to collapse, but I forced myself forward. And the moment I crossed through the gate, I fell to my knees, gasping, trying to breathe. My chest rose and fell in sharp bursts. My vision was blurry. And then, I looked back. She was there, standing at the edge of the desert, just watching me. The light from the perimeter poles lit up just enough for me to see her shape. Tall, skeletal, her legs still bent backward. But now, there was something worse. She was smiling. Not a human smile, not a smile a face should make. Her lips stretched too far, like her skin was being pulled against her will. And even from that distance, I could see her teeth. My stomach turned. Then, she was gone. Not ran away, not moved, just vanished. Like she had never been there at all. I stayed frozen on my knees, cold sweat dripping down my face. My rifle still clutched to my chest, my hands shaking so bad I could barely breathe. The silence stretched on. The desert was normal again. But I knew this wasn't over. Not for me. I didn't sleep. Even after making it back to base, even after locking myself in the barracks, I just sat there, clutching my rifle like it could actually protect me from whatever was out there. What the hell did I see? My mind wouldn't stop. What the hell had I seen? What was that thing, and why did it feel so wrong? I only started to relax when the sun began to rise. The daylight made the terror of the night before feel a little less real. But deep in my chest, I still had that irrational certainty that this wasn't over. By the time the clock hit 06 Mao, I knew what I had to do. I went straight to Corporal Rodriguez. He was one of the most experienced guys here, and even if I sounded like a lunatic, I needed answers. I found him in the mess hall, drinking coffee, looking like nothing in the world could bother him. I sat at his table and got straight to the point. I saw something on patrol. He stopped stirring his cup and looked at me. His face didn't show surprise, just tiredness. I know. That short response threw me off. What do you mean, you know? He sighed, glanced around, like he wanted to make sure no one was listening. Then he leaned forward and spoke quietly. Other guys have seen it too, but no one talks about it. This has happened before. My stomach tightened. Have you seen it? Rodriguez was silent for a moment. Then he looked away. Not directly, but I've heard it. I felt it. He took a slow sip of coffee, thinking. Soldiers have disappeared here, McAllister. Always on night patrols, always alone. A chill crawled up my spine. And the base does nothing? He gave me a humorless smile. What are they supposed to do? Write in a report that a desert monster took one of ours? I had no response. Rodriguez stood up, dumped the rest of his coffee. Before leaving, he gave me one last piece of advice. If you want to leave here in one piece, request a transfer. Fast. I sat there for a while, just staring at the table, trying to process everything. Other soldiers had seen it. Some were never seen again. The base knew, but they pretended nothing was happening. I ran my hands over my face. I had to get out. Back at the barracks, I threw my pack on the bed and started packing my things. My transfer request was already being processed. But I didn't want to spend another night in this place. That's when I noticed something was wrong. My gear, my backpack had deep scratches on the side, like something had dug claws into it. And it wasn't just the backpack. My leg holster had marks too, small thin cuts on the straps, like something had tried to grab me as I ran. The air felt heavy again. My body went cold. I didn't remember anything touching me, but something had tried. I slowly looked around the room, suddenly feeling like I wasn't alone. Then I noticed something else. The window was open, and I was 100% sure I didn't leave it open last night. I wasn't spending another night here. After what happened, after what Rodriguez told me, I knew I had to get the hell out as fast as possible. My transfer request had already been submitted, and that morning, when I checked my status, approved. My flight was in 2 days, but there was one last thing. I had one final night patrol before I could leave. One more shift. A part of me wanted to bail. I could say I was sick, that I twisted my ankle, anything. But that would only draw attention. I didn't want anyone knowing I was scared. So, I geared up as usual, grabbed my rifle, my radio, my flashlight, just one more shift, and I'd be free. The shift started at 2 a.m. The desert was dark, as always, but at least the wind was blowing. For once, the absolute silence from the previous nights hadn't settled in. Not yet. I walked the perimeter, checked the guard posts, passed by the watchtowers. Everything seemed normal, or at least it looked that way. Then, I reached the far end of the fence, where the base met the open desert. That's when I felt it. The silence was back. No wind, no insects, no nothing. I froze where I stood, gripping my rifle tighter, and then I looked down. Footprints. At first, they looked normal, human. Maybe another soldier had passed through earlier, but as I followed them with my eyes, they started to change. The steps widened, like whoever left them had started leaning forward, and then the human footprints turned into wolf tracks. My stomach twisted, and that's when I felt it. I wasn't alone. The thing that wore my face. Slowly, I lifted my head, and I saw myself, 10 meters ahead, standing in the shadows, looking right at me. Same uniform, same gear. It looked exactly like me, but it wasn't me. The posture was wrong. Its shoulders were off, like the bones were set wrong. The skin was stretched, like a mask that didn't quite fit. And the eyes, they weren't human. They glowed yellow in the dark. Then it opened its mouth, and in my own voice it spoke. "McAllister, come here." My heart stopped. It was my voice, but it wasn't right. There was something off. A dry, hollow sound underneath the words. I wanted to run, to bolt back to the base, but then I remembered Rodriguez's warning. If you hear your name coming from the desert, don't answer. I squeezed my eyes shut. Don't respond. Don't look. I stood there, fists clenched around my rifle, eyes shut tight, heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst, and then I heard it move, shuffling footsteps, a wet, sickening sound, like something shifting. It was closer now. I could feel it, the smell of wet earth, of dried blood. A sharp crack. Like bones breaking, then the voice came again, right next to me. "McAllister, look at me." It was gone. My whole body shook. "Don't look, don't answer." My jaw locked. Cold sweat rolled down my back. For a second, I thought I was going to pass out. But then, the silence vanished, like a switch flipping. The wind returned. The insects started chirping again. I opened my eyes, and the thing was gone. The desert was empty. I took a deep, shaky breath and ran back to base. I knew. I had just escaped something far worse than I could ever understand. And I never wanted to feel that again. By the next morning, I had already made my decision. I needed to get out. The previous night still weighed on my mind. The suffocating silence, the footprints changing, that thing wearing my face, speaking in my voice. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what it wanted, but I knew one thing. I wasn't sticking around to find out. I shoved my clothes into my duffel bag, not even bothering to fold them. I just wanted to be as far away from this base as possible before night fell again. When I finished packing, I went to say goodbye to Rodriguez. He was sitting in the mess hall, wearing the same tired expression as always, like he already knew what I was going to say before I even said it. "So, you're leaving?" It wasn't a question. I nodded. "My flight's tonight." Rodriguez let out a slow sigh, took a sip of coffee, and looked at me with something that almost seemed like pity. "I hope you made the right call, McAllister." But he hesitated. Then he spoke lower. "It knows your name now. This never ends." A cold shiver ran down my spine. "What the hell does that mean?" Rodriguez just stared at me. Then he shook his head, like he'd tried explaining this to someone before, like he knew there was no point. I wanted to press him for answers, but a part of me didn't want to know. I grabbed my duffel bag and walked out without looking back. My flight was scheduled for 10 p.m. The day passed fast, but my mind was still stuck in the night before. I wanted to believe it was over. That once I was off this base, I'd never have to deal with this again. But Rodriguez knew something I didn't. His warning kept echoing in my head. It knows your name now. This never ends. By 7 p.m., I was alone in the barracks waiting to leave. It was dark outside. The base was quiet, but for the first time in days, it was a normal quiet. I could hear soldiers talking in the distance, engines running, mechanical noises. For the first time in days, I started to feel relief. I was so close to getting out. And then, I heard it. Low. From outside. "McAllister, come here." My blood ran cold. The voice was low, whispered. But it was my voice. My heartbeat started pounding. I didn't move. I didn't look at the window, my throat was dry. My body locked in place. Then, the voice came again. Closer. "McAllister, come here." I could barely breathe. I shut my eyes, because I knew. If I looked outside, it would be there, maybe standing by the window, maybe waiting in the dark, just waiting for me to see it. But I didn't look. I just stood still, ignoring the wave of cold terror spreading through me. Then, the silence returned. The bass noises continued as usual. Nothing else happened. I knew it was still watching me. I knew this was never just about Fort Huachuca. And somehow, it followed me. I grabbed my duffel bag and walked out of the barracks without looking back. I never returned to that base, but sometimes in the middle of the night, I still hear my name being called, and I never ever answer. I was never one to believe the stories that circulate among soldiers. There's always someone talking about secret experiments, biological weapons, or some classified test gone wrong. Most of the time, it's just bullshit meant to scare new recruits. Just another night. That night I was on duty at Luke Air Force Base, Arizona. Just another routine night patrol. Dead silence, the warm desert wind, that faint smell of dust and jet fuel hanging in the air. One of those nights where every little noise sounds louder than it should. As we waited for the shift change, Sergeant Harrison lit a cigarette and threw out one of those offhand remarks, the kind that doesn't seem like much at first, but sticks in your head anyway. Something escaped from the underground labs. I laughed, thinking he was just trying to mess with me. What kind of something? He took a slow drag, exhaled, and stared into the darkness beyond the fence. They say it's some kind of genetic experiment, half man, half wolf. I made some dumb joke about horror movies, and we went back to work. But after a while, I kept thinking about it. Underground labs, sure, the base had restricted areas, but I'd never heard of anything like that. I pushed the conversation out of my mind once I got in my Jeep and started my patrol. My route took me to a more isolated sector, near the old supply warehouses. It was an abandoned spot, filled with rusting containers and forgotten equipment. The radio was quiet, just the usual low static. Then, out of nowhere, a strange noise. The transmission, at first, just static. Then, something that sounded like heavy breathing. I grabbed my radio. "This is Callaway. Any unit nearby?" Silence. Only that same breathing, like someone was right there, inside the radio. And then, a growl. Not a human sound. Not even a dog. Something deeper. Heavier, like it came from an animal too big to be here. That's when I smelled it. Blood. I jumped out of the Jeep, rifle up, flashlight ready. The smell was coming from nearby, and as I walked forward, I saw it. A dark trail smeared across the concrete. I followed it, heart pounding. Then, the bodies. 2 soldiers, completely torn apart, blood still fresh running through the cracks in the pavement. Before I could react, I felt it. You ever have that absolute certainty that you're being watched? Slowly, I raised my flashlight, pointed it at the top of one of the warehouses. And that's when I saw it. The eyes were the first thing I noticed, glowing yellow, reflecting the light like a predator. Then, the silhouette, tall, massive, covered in dark fur, but still human enough to make my stomach drop. The vanishing, my heart stopped. The thing didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. And then, in the blink of an eye, it was gone, vanished into the darkness, And right then I knew. Something was very, very wrong on that base. My body froze. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But my brain refused to process what I was seeing. That thing, it wasn't human. I could hear my own heartbeat, heavy, erratic. Sweat dripped down my neck as I kept my flashlight pointed at the top of the warehouse. But the moment I blinked, those yellow eyes disappeared. Then I heard it, something massive moving, a thud against the metal, claws scraping against hard surfaces. I turned instinctively, trying to follow the noise, but it was coming from all directions. Shit, it was circling me. I tightened my grip on my rifle, chambered around, and stepped back, trying to stay calm. They always tell you in training, panic will get you killed. But how the hell do you stay calm when you're facing something like... The hot desert wind carried that same thick metallic scent of blood. Then, the scraping sound, something dragging itself across the concrete. It was getting closer. I turned toward the sound, and that's when it jumped. I had no time to react. The impact hit me like a truck. I was thrown backwards, my body slamming into the ground. My rifle flew out of my hands, sliding across the pavement. And then weight, massive, crushing down on my chest. My flashlight rolled, casting just enough light for me to see its face. The face of a nightmare. I saw teeth, huge, sharp, dripping with saliva under the dim light. The hot breath against my face carried the sour stench of raw meat. It growled, a deep guttural sound that rumbled inside my chest like a low-frequency vibration. I felt the claws press against my armor, testing the material, as if it was deciding how to rip me apart. I was going to die. I knew I was going to die. The last chance panic took over my body. Instinct alone made my hand reach for my sidearm. Without thinking, I ripped it from the holster and pulled the trigger 3 times. Point blank, right into its chest. The gunfire roared through the base, deafening. The impact made the creature stagger back with a scream that wasn't human. It wasn't the cry of a wounded animal. It wasn't the scream of a man in pain. It was something in between, something that shouldn't exist. It locked eyes with me, and for a moment I thought it was going to attack again. But then, in one fluid, unnatural motion, it vanished. I lay there trembling, chest rising and falling in shallow, panicked breaths. My brain refused to process what had just happened. Then I heard the radios crackle. Reinforcements were coming. By the time the soldiers arrived, they found me sitting on the ground, still gripping my pistol with shaking hands. They asked what happened, but I couldn't speak. I just kept staring into the darkness where that thing had disappeared, waiting, expecting it to come back. But no one saw anything, no tracks, no bodies, not even blood, just me, a jeep, and a flashlight lying on the ground. Nothing happened here, soldier. That's what the officer in charge told me as they wrote up the report. No eye contact, no chance to argue, just nothing happened here. But I knew the truth, and by the nervous looks on the faces of the men around me, they knew it too. I tried to forget. After that night, I did what any trained soldier would do. Follow orders, pretend nothing happened, and go back to duty like everything was normal. But it wasn't normal, because I knew what I saw, and more than that, I knew they were hiding something. The bodies of the soldiers disappeared like they never existed. No reports, no investigation, not even a whisper among the higher-ups. It was as if those deaths didn't matter, and that left a bitter taste in my mouth. So I started looking for answers. Nothing obvious. Nothing that would raise suspicion. Just casual questions here and there, quick conversations with the older soldiers. Most of them looked at me like I was crazy. Others just shut down and walked away. But one or two, they knew something. Over time, I uncovered something worse than I expected. For the past few years, soldiers had been disappearing during internal missions, always in remote areas of the base. Officially, they were marked as transfers or medical discharges, but nobody ever heard from them again. Then I found something that made my blood run cold. An old document, half erased, buried deep in the base's system. Restricted access, but nothing a little creativity couldn't fix. It was a classified experiment record from nearly a decade ago, signed by one person, Dr. Helena Carter. The name wasn't unfamiliar. I had heard of her before, a high-ranking scientist involved in biomedical research on base. What the hell did she have to do with this? I needed to talk to her. I waited until the end of the day and went to the research sector. Security was tight, but I had my clearance. I asked to speak with her, making up some military protocol excuse. The guard gave me a weird look, but after a few minutes she appeared. Short, graying hair tied in a bun, cold expression. She studied me for a moment before speaking. "What do you want, soldier?" I hesitated. I wasn't sure how to approach it, but then I saw something in her eyes, a flicker of recognition, like she already knew why I was there. "It's about the missing soldiers," I finally said. "About whatever came out of that lab." Her eyes narrowed. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, without a word, she simply turned around and walked back into the lab. I was about to follow her when I heard something behind me. Footsteps. Several. When I turned around, 2 high-ranking officers were standing near the entrance watching me. One of them adjusted his uniform and stepped closer. No smile. "Listen carefully, Calloway," he said, voice firm and cold. I felt a chill run down my spine. "You're asking the wrong questions." My pulse spiked. "This isn't your business. Drop it." Then, just like that, they walked away, leaving me alone in that cold, dimly lit hallway, my heart pounding harder than it should have. They knew. They were warning me to stop. But at that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to stop. I knew I was screwed. After the officer's warning, any sane person would have backed off. But that only made me more sure of what I already suspected. Something much bigger was being covered up at the base, and I needed to know what. 2 nights. Later, I found myself in all black, waiting for the right moment to sneak into the restricted section of the labs. I wasn't a spy or a hacker, just a soldier with too many questions and 0 answers. But I knew enough about patrol routes and shift changes to slip in without raising suspicion. The problem? I had no idea what I was about to find. The archive room wasn't as heavily secured as I expected. Maybe because nobody believed some regular soldier would have the guts to sneak in. I used a security card I borrowed from a storage locker and stepped inside. The smell of old paper and overheated electronics hit me immediately. Shelves full of folders, locked metal boxes, computers flashing in sleep mode. I started searching. It took a few minutes before I found it. A thick file labeled in the simplest way possible. Project Fenrir, classified. My breathing picked up. I opened it, and what I saw knocked the air out of my lungs. Genetic testing, biological engineering applied to soldiers. They were trying to create hybrid super soldiers, splicing human DNA with predators. Most of the document was technical jargon, but the summary was crystal clear. They wanted to build living war machines, and one name appeared over and over in the reports. Jonas Kane. There was a photo attached. A strong man. Cold, hardened eyes. Buzz cut. Military uniform. He looked like any other special operations soldier. But the report said he was the first successful subject to undergo full modification, and after his first test mission, he lost control. Kane became something beyond human, something that couldn't be contained. The thing that attacked me that night, it was him. My stomach turned. The document stated that he escaped from the underground labs months ago, but the information was never released. They weren't trying to capture him. They were trying to cover up what they had done. My blood went cold as I flipped to the last page. There were other names. Jonas Kane was just the first, but he wasn't the only one. This has always been real. And I wonder what you think you're going to do with that information, Soldier Calloway. My body locked up. A cold, calculated voice. I turned slowly. Dr. Helena Carter stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching me with no emotion. I should have panicked, but the only thing I could say was, "This is real." She gave a small smile, not happy, something more, sad. "It always has been." I swallowed hard. "What happened to the others?" She hesitated for a moment. Then she closed the door behind her and stepped forward. She wasn't scared that I found out the truth. Jonas Kane is just the tip of the iceberg, she said, taking the folder from my hands and shutting it. Project Fenrir was never shut down, and he's not the only one that got loose. The air felt heavy, hard to breathe. Before I could ask anything else, a base-wide alarm started blaring, then I heard it. A howl, long, deep, too close. Dr. Carter closed her eyes for a moment and sighed. I suppose now you understand the problem we have. I wasn't sure what scared me more, the howl outside or how calm she was about it. The alarm blared through the hallways of the base, that relentless, suffocating sound that meant one thing. A threat was active. I knew what was happening. Kane was here. Soldiers mobilized within minutes. The base went into lockdown, and an elite squad was deployed to deal with the hostile target. I knew these guys. Veterans of Black Ops missions, highly trained, well-equipped, but they had no idea what they were walking into, and that made me uneasy, because now, after everything I read in the files, I wasn't sure if Jonas Kane was just a mindless monster. Keep him alive if possible. Helena didn't seem shocked by the mobilization. If anything, she seemed prepared. She simply grabbed a radio and issued a short, cold order. Keep him alive if possible. But when she looked at me, I saw the truth in her face. They weren't expecting to bring him back. I ran after the tactical squad. I needed to talk to them before they did something stupid. By the time I caught up, they were in the west hangar, prepping gear, automatic weapons, night vision, tactical drones. One guy was loading incendiary grenade launchers. Is this really necessary? I muttered, disbelief in my voice. The team leader, a tall guy with a permanent scowl, turned to me. Direct orders. Something broke out of a classified lab. We locate and eliminate. Listen, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I know what you're hunting, and I can tell you right now, it's not a normal target. He let out a dry laugh. Nothing's ever normal when people start freaking out. You don't get it. He was one of us. The team leader's expression shifted. What? I took a deep breath. His name is Jonas Kane. He was a soldier. He might still be aware. A few of the men exchanged uneasy glances, but before the squad leader could respond, the radios crackled. Visual contact. Visual contact. Target is at the southern perimeter. The team moved out immediately. I followed, and that's how I witnessed the massacre. They found Kane near an old abandoned bunker at the far edge of the base. He was standing in the darkness, too big, too still, like he was waiting. Then, before they could react, he attacked. The first man never stood a chance. Kane hit him so hard that his body flew 5 meters, slamming into a metal container with a sickening crack. The second tried to fire, but before he could even scream, Kane dragged him into the shadows. The rest of the squad opened fire. Nothing stopped him. Bullets ripped into his body, but Kane didn't fall. He moved fast, erratic, attacking from the flanks, taking out soldiers one by one. Screams, blood, darkness, then silence. I was the only one left standing, hands trembling, heart hammering, staring at the bodies and Kane back in the shadows, watching me. This time he didn't attack, and I realized he still knew who he was. I was in shock. The entire squad had been wiped out in minutes. Bodies were scattered across the southern perimeter of the base, some torn apart, others simply gone. But for some reason, Kane didn't kill me. He had the chance, twice, but he didn't do it. And somehow that was even more terrifying. Before I could process what had just happened, a hand grabbed my arm and yanked me away. Come with me, now. It was Helena. She dragged me down a side corridor, pulling me away from the wreckage of what was once a military operation. Only when we entered one of the underground labs and she locked the door behind us did I finally find my voice. You knew, I spat, adrenaline burning through my veins. You knew this was going to happen. She took a deep breath, her hands bracing against the table in front of her. And for the first time I saw it, guilt flickering in her eyes. Yes, she admitted. I knew. I ran a hand down my face, trying to hold back the rage building inside me. "What the hell did you do to him?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she opened a drawer and tossed another folder onto the table. More classified documents. "Jonas Kane was one of the first volunteers for Project Fenrir," she began. "He was an exceptional soldier, disciplined, focused, the kind of man who never backed down." I opened the folder. There it was, his photo, taken before the mutation. He looked normal, human. Did he agree to this? Yes, but he didn't know the truth. I turned the page and felt sick. Images of the mutation process. Bones elongating, teeth growing, veins bulging under his skin. Helena kept talking. "The government wanted super soldiers, something that could survive any environment, any combat, but the genetic modifications had side effects." "Side effects?" I spat the words, my stomach twisting in disgust. She held my gaze. "He started losing control. The thing inside him took over." I clenched my jaw. "So why didn't you just kill him?" She hesitated. "Because we wanted to see how far he could go." I felt something deep and cold spread through my chest. Rage. "You tortured him. You kept him locked up, experimenting, testing." She didn't deny it. "But he escaped. And now he's hunting the people who turned him into this." I stepped back, trying to process everything. Jonas Kane wasn't just a monster. He was a man, a soldier, betrayed by his own country. But I had seen what he did out there. He wouldn't stop. He would kill anyone in his path, and in that moment, I realized I couldn't let this continue. But I also couldn't let the government cover it up again. I knew where to find him. After the massacre, Kane had vanished into the darkness of the base, but I knew he was still here. He hadn't run. He was waiting. I grabbed my rifle and extra pistol and headed toward the abandoned hangars. The place was isolated, silent, filled with rusting metal structures and long shadows cast by the moon. The entire base was on high alert, but no one dared to come here. This was his territory now. I moved slowly, feeling the cold sweat run down my back. The smell of blood still hung in the air. And then, I heard it. Heavy breathing. I stopped in the middle of the main hangar, rifle raised. "Kane!" My voice echoed in the empty space. Silence. Then, a low growl. He was circling me. I closed my eyes for a second, took a deep breath, and spoke again, trying to keep my voice steady. "You still know who I am." "I know you do." Another pause. Something moved to my right, fast. I turned, but all I saw were shadows. I kept going. "I know what they did to you. I know they betrayed you. But this thing you're doing, it won't change anything." A loud crash behind me. I turned on instinct and fired. The shot hit a metal container, and then he leapt from the shadows. The impact was brutal. I was thrown back into a pile of crates, pain exploding in my shoulder. My rifle slipped from my hands. Kane growled, standing over me. And his yellow eyes, they weren't just filled with rage, they were filled with hate. He wasn't listening. There was no human left, just instinct. With a desperate reflex, I grabbed my pistol and fired 3 times, point blank. The shots hit his chest. Dark blood splattered across the floor. But he didn't fall. Instead, he grabbed my leg and threw me across the hangar. I hit the ground hard, the world spinning. I swallowed, tasting blood in my mouth. My body screamed in pain, but I couldn't stop. He was coming again. Fast, deadly. I rolled to the side at the last second, grabbing a metal rod from the ground. The moment he swiped his claws at me, I swung with everything I had. The impact rang through the hangar. Kane staggered back, dazed. This was my chance. I grabbed my pistol again, took aim. Boom! The shot tore through his knee. He collapsed against a container, roaring in pain. I crawled toward my rifle and snatched it up, struggling to stand. My breath was ragged. My lungs burned. Kane lay on the ground, gasping. His chest rose and fell in quick, uneven movements. His blood pooled on the concrete. He looked at me, and for the first time, His eyes changed. For just a moment, he wasn't the beast anymore. He was just a man, a broken soldier. His mouth opened and in a low, raspy voice he whispered, "I'm not the only one." Then his breathing stopped. The hangar fell into absolute silence. I let the rifle slip from my hands. My body trembled. I wanted to believe it was over. But his final words wouldn't leave my head. "I'm not the only one." I barely had time to breathe. Minutes after Kane collapsed, they arrived. Unmarked black vehicles, soldiers with no insignias, agents with cold, calculated stares. Within minutes, his body was gone. The wreckage, the blood, the traces of the fight, all erased as if nothing had ever happened. The officers surrounded me, and a man in a dark suit gave me the only explanation I would ever get. "This never happened, Soldier Calloway. Forget it." I stood there watching as they wiped every trace of it away. The Project Fenrir documents disappeared. The slaughtered soldiers would never be recognized. And me, I was simply sent back to my post. For weeks I tried to move on. But every night, when I closed my eyes, I saw Kane's eyes. That last moment before he died, and worse than that, his final words. Then, one day, something arrived. An anonymous envelope slid under the door of my barracks. No sender, no identification. Inside, there was a dossier, more reports, more experiments, and at the very end, a single handwritten sentence. Jonas Kane was just the first. Others are still out there. I gripped the paper tightly, a chill running down my spine. They were still out there, and somehow I knew this wasn't over. Are the stories about Arizona's secret military bases just conspiracy theories? Or the tip of a much bigger secret hidden by the government? The Project Fenrir, the Skinwalkers of Fort Huachuca, and countless other unexplained accounts suggest that something is happening within these facilities, something never revealed to the public. But what about you? Have you ever heard of any strange encounters involving military bases? Do you know someone who has witnessed something unexplainable? Share your story in the comments below. If you enjoyed this content and want more mysterious and forbidden stories, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. And of course, share this video with your friends so more people can discover these hidden secrets. The truth is out there, and it may be scarier than you think.